Attention tribe.
Trucking industry.
Ready to take charge
Join
of
us
your
for
future in the
CMC
trucking
Live.
industry.
Powered by
Join us for CMC Live at the Mid-America Trucking Show, March 26th and 27th in Louisville, Kentucky. Led by Kevin Rutherford, CMC Live delivers actionable insights and real-world solutions designed to help you transform your business. From cutting-edge strategies to hands-on advice, this is the event that puts you in the driver's seat of success.
Don't miss this life-changing experience. Don't miss this life-changing experience.
Be unstoppable.
CMC Live.
March 26th and 27th at the Mid-America Trucking Show in Louisville, Kentucky. Register now at truckingshow.com. Register now at truckingshow.com.
Your money, your taxes, your truck, and your road to success in the trucking industry. This is Trucking Business and Beyond, the show that puts the money where it belongs, back in your pocket.
Good morning, you beautiful bunch of fuckers, and welcome to my world. I'm your host, Kevin Rutherford. It is Friday, December 20th. It's time for some trucking technology and efficiency. We can also make it a free-for-all Friday. I've got, let me see who's here with me today. I've got Henry, Joel, and a special guest. Dwayne is here with us from Volvo, and I'm pretty sure we're going to be talking about Tuesday's topic of the gear steps and all kinds of other stuff. Phone lines are open. Looks like we've already got some calls coming in. We're going to get started here. Before we do, one quick announcement. I hope Jerry's listening this morning. Jerry, we created a sale in your honor. So we've got a nut butter sale going on. If you spend $60 or more on the Old Dog Ranch nuts and nut butter, Jerry, you're going to get a free pumpkin spice almond butter. Jump in and join it. All you have to do is head over to the website, throw it in your cart, and you'll get the special. All right. Enough of that. Let's get to some truck stuff. I'm just going to bring everybody in at once, and we can just start talking all over each other like we normally do. Dwayne, just so you know, Fridays are a little crazy. We all just start screaming at each other usually.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's always.
Let's make them feel welcome and start stepping on each other right away.
And there you go.
It's always a good time. It's kind of like herding cats.
Kevin, I got something quick because
Sure.
I might have to jump off on the call because I'm expecting a call.
Go ahead.
But did you get started on the book at all yet?
I have not.
Okay.
I have not. I got sucked down the rabbit hole of vaccine books, and I don't think I'll ever be the same. It's bad. It is so much worse than what I even thought. And I've been all over this topic for a long time, but I had no idea how bad this was. I'll be doing an entire special on it at some point. So that has taken up a lot of my reading time these days, and I think I've killed brain cells.
All right. Well, it's going to be interesting with the guest we have here today. So
Yeah.
with that,
Yeah, that's for sure.
I'm going to mute my phone because there's a train going by.
Oh, well, good. All right. We'll get to it then. Joel, Dwayne. So just so you know, I had this class on Wednesday, and I got to tell you, we'll do the best we can here, but without the charts, the graphs, the calculators, the scenarios where Dwayne took us through scenarios where we could watch gear changes happen in two different trucks with two different setups. We could go through all kinds of different scenarios, and you could see what's happening. You could watch what's happening in all the numbers. Then it finally made sense to me. I don't know if I would have been able to really grasp it without those, but we're going to give it a try, right, guys?
And we'll do our best.
Yeah. So go ahead. I'll sit back and listen and jump in with some color commentary once in a while.
Well, hold on, Kevin.
All right.
Why don't you give us give us a starting point here. Where would you like us to start?
You know, here's what I'll say, how the topic came up. I'm not even sure where we should start. So I remember talking with you about this it's come up several times on the show with the gear steps, the RPM drop when we shift. And I had always assumed it was a fixed number. I didn't realize that it would be a variable somehow. And, all those years when I was doing fuel mileage testing, we would try to do this. You're working with a RPM gauge that isn't all that accurate most of the time. It doesn't give you really close steps at all, and it's changing so fast that I always felt like, it seems like that the best I can tell that a full gear on these transmissions is about 400 to 500 RPM. And if we're splitting a gear, it seems to be about half that. But that was the best I could tell. And when you said the higher we go on these gear ratios, the smaller that drop becomes, I couldn't get my head around that. I couldn't understand why it was a variable. And it wasn't just fixed. That to me, the transmission gear is the transmission gear. I fell into the same trap that I make fun of everybody else about, right? Because really, I say, you can't just look at the rear end gear and tell me what truck's going to pull. We've been saying that forever. I was looking at it going, wait a minute, the gear and the transmissions, the step's the same. So I fell into
right?
I fell into the same trap. I forgot. There's at least two other factors here in overall gearing. That's something we probably should have been talking more about. Is overall gearing, the calculation between the transmission gear you're in at the moment, the rear end ratio, and the tire size all affect this. So when the call came in, and I blew this call to begin with, I missed the first part where it was a mechanical engine. So I'm wondering why we're talking about 390 gears, and I was losing my mind over that. Then I realized it's mechanical. But the comment made by the caller was, I don't want to do that because the drop on my gears is already too big. And he made the statement that he wasn't saying they were fixed. He was saying this would make it worse. And I was going to step in, and I thought, wait a minute. If I say it's wrong, I have to be able to explain myself. Because I tell people all the time, somebody tells you something, just ask them why. And if somebody would have asked me why, I wouldn't have been able to explain it. So I didn't jump in. I held back and said, I'm going to have to go talk to Joel about this. And then luckily, Joel, you called. So that's what started all this. I didn't even really know this was an issue. It reminds me a lot of, there was a time on this show, we argued like this about how a differential worked. It was shocking how many different opinions people had about what was happening in a differential or in the power divider, which is also a differential. We were all over the board. We had all kinds of answers. Well, why when you're stuck in the ditch, the only wheel that turns is the one that's not on the ground? And everybody had their thought. And then everybody said, well, that doesn't work because if I lock in my power divider, this happens. And I thought, we're never going to solve this amongst ourselves. So I actually went, I think it was probably Freightliner at the time that I was working with. And I went to them and said, do you have somebody that can come on the air and explain this to us? And they did. And once they did, it becomes a non-issue. This isn't something we have to talk about all the time. Once we understand it, then we can just talk about, well, here's why we would make this change, and you just move on. So that's why I want to let's clear the air on this one. Let's get it right. And we probably won't have to discuss this part of it much anymore.
So let me kind of preface the whole conversation here before we turn Dwayne loose with the numbers. So when we talk about gear ratios, this has to be holistic. We have to, like you said, understand the tire size. We have to understand the transmission gearing steps. We have to understand the engine's power curve. We have to know all these things. And it gets even deeper than that. Me and Dwayne were talking about this subject just a couple of days ago, and aerodynamics came into play with gearing. And I'll have them break that down for you as well, which who would have thought, right?
Right, exactly.
So rolling resistance plays a role in gearing. All these things impact gearing. And, way too often we throw around gear ratio suggestions. We don't know the power curve of the engine. We don't really know where the sweet spot of the engine technically is. And all these things are just super important in order to get the gear ratios right. Once we get it right, we should be able to say, okay, in overdrive, this truck is going to produce this much horsepower from this RPM to this RPM. It's going to have this much gradability. It's going to have enough horsepower to go this fast with this much weight. It's all math. Now, I'm not great at math. Fortunately, Dwayne is. I'm like everybody else. I've got a really good feel for this.
Right.
I've done it for years and years, and I've got this feel, and I'll hit Dwayne up with stuff all the time saying, hey, man, what about this or what about this? And then he'll run the numbers and see if my gut feeling is in the ballpark. And, it's been a pretty good working relationship that way. We have the kind of hands-on out in the real world type feedback that he's putting numbers to and proving this stuff out. But at the end of the day, it is all math. It's not opinions. It's not, I think, this is all math. And it's important for everybody to understand this. And you have to know what you're working with in order to get to the correct solution.
Hey, Joel, I was thinking about this the other day, and I never thought I would regret this statement, but I can clearly remember sitting in 9th grade algebra after getting a little toasty at lunch going, I'm never going to use this crap.
Oh, shoot.
I wish I would have paid attention.
Well, all that being said, Dwayne, I don't know where do you think we should start on this? At the beginning, right?
Yeah, let's start at the beginning, I guess.
All right.
I think the easiest way to look at this, so many people focus at looking at the rear axle ratio and think that, that rear axle ratio is going to help me pull the hill, and that's how it's going to determine how it's going to pull. And I don't mean to offend anybody on this by any means, but pulling power
Dwayne,
up a hill has more to do with horse. Yes.
Let me just stop you there, so you know the rules of the show here. If we're not offending somebody, we're not doing our job. That's the whole point here. Don't be afraid to offend anybody. I would much rather, if you're offended and it really bothers you, just go away. The rest of us will stay here. We'll learn something.
Okay. So pulling power has more to do with the horsepower that you have available when you're pulling the hill. So that has to do with ratio, not necessarily the rear axle ratio, but the combined ratio between the transmission and the rear axle. Okay.
Can I stop us here just for a second? Because I think I can probably interject and help people. So when you say that, I get it. What we're talking about here is we all run around bragging, well, I have 600 horsepower, but what you're talking about is that horsepower available based on your gearing? Are you accessing that horsepower when you need it? Because if you're at the wrong RPM range, that horsepower might be totally wasted. It's possible, right, that we could have a 600 horsepower engine that is actually putting less horsepower at the time than a 400 horsepower engine.
Kevin, I'll jump in on that too, because they don't hit on where that is. Just like you're saying, I used to run into that with they think a 342 gear with a 0.73 overdrive was the same as a 250. And they'd be like, well, how can it pull with a 250 rear? Well, you were at the same place you were before.
Well, even when we've explained it in the past, we still focus more on the ratio itself and why that might pull better. But I think making people understand this horsepower issue is important, because horsepower is what everybody talks about. It's a bragging right? Well, I have all this horsepower. Well, you do, but do you understand when you're accessing it, and is it just being wasted? And could you actually pull a hill better with a truck that has less horsepower? And the answer, Dwayne, is yes, right?
Can you pull a hill with less horsepower?
Well, no, with a truck with an engine with less horsepower, just because
it's peak horsepower.
Right. Right.
Yeah, you could, depending on how you gear it. Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
So that's what I'm saying is all that horsepower doesn't mean you're going to be the first one to the top of the hill. Somebody with less horsepower but better gearing might actually pull better.
Yeah, let me give you an example here, Kevin. So I'm going to use a Volvo engine because I'm very familiar with this, the D13 turbo compounded engine. Now, if we look at 1,000 RPMs, that engine is putting out 1,850 foot-pounds of torque. Now, all an engine does is an engine does not put out horsepower; it puts out torque.
Got it.
It's a twisting force, 1,850 foot-pounds of torque, and then you're putting RPMs in there, and horsepower is just a measurement of the torque applied at a certain speed. Okay, so there's a formula for it. I won't bother you with that one, but at 1,000 RPMs, the engine's putting out 1,850 pound-feet of torque. Okay, it's putting out 373 horse at 1,000 RPM.
Okay.
Now, if we do that same calculation and go further out, roughly 1,250-ish, you're going to be right at that 455 horse. So the common misconception is that most people driving think as soon as we start that engine, I got a 455 or a 500 horse. As soon as I start, all 500 of those horses line up in a straight line and charge that hill.
Right.
It's truly based on that torque curve. So as the engine increases in RPM, so therefore does the horses that are available. So there's some factors to think about that as well. But now that we've talked about horsepower a little bit, I think it's important to understand the difference between rear axle ratio and transmission ratio and the overall ratio. Okay. So if you take let's just say in direct drive, let's just say you got a direct drive transmission, to get the overall ratio, well, the ratio in a direct drive transmission is just 1. Okay. Now, if you take your ratio and your differential, 325, well, the overall ratio between that is 325. If you look at a 247, the overall ratio between those is now 247 if you go on a direct drive at a 247. So what you're doing is simply multiplying the transmission ratio times the rear axle ratio, and that gives you the overall ratio. So if you're, say, using like a 279, we'll use that as an example because it fits really well with another rear axle as well, and you have an overdrive transmission, in a 279, a 215 will give you the same exact overall ratio in direct drive. It has the same pulling power. They are equal.
Got it.
It's just one would be in direct drive versus overdrive. So a lot of people think that high numeric ratios are going to pull faster. Well, the only difference with a low numeric ratio is maybe you're going to be down another gear in the gearbox in the transmission, but the pulling power will be the same. It's the overall ratio that makes a difference.
Got it.
Now, why does that make a difference, and why was that important to anybody? When we had manual transmissions, well, we still do, but that's where these things were deep-seated. If you look at a 450 horse engine pulling 80,000 pounds, in top gear, it has a gradability of about 1.5%. Now, what the heck does that mean? Well, that means if you imagine a 1,000-foot run, it will go up 15 feet before the driver has to do a downshift. So that's where this was seated. Now, some guy like Joel says, let's do this downspeeding stuff and let's go down to a 215. And that guy who's driving a manual transmission is thinking, you're off your rocker. You've lost your mind. So the gradability in a 215 is about 0.7% with 80,000 pounds and 455 horse. So it's about half.
Okay.
So now that driver goes up 7 feet and has to do a downshift. and then he goes down the hill and goes up 7 feet and does a downshift. He's downshifting twice as much.
I want to clarify something here, just because it confused me the first time I heard it, and I had to think about it a little bit. Can you just explain? Because when I hear when he goes up 7 feet, the first thing I think about is I only traveled 7 feet down the road. But you're doing an elevation per so many feet. So what were you using? 1,000 feet? Is that the?
Yep. So we call it a rise versus run.
Yeah.
So the run is,
in the first case,
the run's 1,000 feet.
Right. You went.
Yep.
What, 15? Now I got to think about it. In the first example,
15 feet in elevation.
In 1,000 feet of road travel. And now in the second example, we travel 1,000 feet down the road, but we only rise 7 feet in elevation.
Right.
Now, yeah. Okay. That was confusing me, because I was thinking in my mind, if I'm only going 7 feet, holy cow. But we're not. We're talking about right. So I just, since I was trying to work that out in my head, I thought I'd jump in and explain that so we could see. We're going farther down the road, but the idea you're getting at is, with this higher ratio, the 2.15, we're just going to have to shift a whole lot more often.
Yeah, essentially. And a manual transmission, somebody driving a manual transmission, it would drive them absolutely bonkers.
Right.
You'd lose your mind. But since the introduction of the automated transmission, it allows you to, it shifts itself. Now, let me ask you a question. In your car, do you care what gear you're in?
Never. Well, I would like to know whether I'm in forward or reverse, but other than that, it doesn't matter much.
Yeah, in most cases, when you're in forward in your car, do you even know what gear you're in?
No, not anymore. One of my cars has an automated 10-speed. I have no idea what gear I'm in ever.
Sure. And as long as the vehicle performs like you think it should and is getting good fuel economy, it really shouldn't make any difference what gear it's in. But the old manual transmission, we still bring some of those habits along with us and think that still applies with an automated transmission. And that's just not the fact.
Something to also keep in mind when we're talking about this. So with the older style manual transmission, you have more rotating mass to deal with, because there's more parts in those transmissions. Oftentimes they're dual countershaft. They have an auxiliary section that has countershafts. They're straight cut gears that are bigger. They require a lot of oil. And, look, I was brought up on 13 and 18 speeds, and I thought I was the shit because I could float all the gears, and, I was just a man. Yeah. Trust me when I tell you, you are not going to shift the manual as fast as today's automated manual transmissions. It will vary.
Not even close.
Especially the new iShift, and I think the DT12 is very similar. They're very fast. So you have to keep that in mind, especially if you've only driven a manual transmission. It becomes even harder to get your mind around, because now Dwayne's telling, well, I got to shift twice as much. The shifts aren't going to be as fast. You're going to lose momentum. You're going to break torque every time you have to shift. And, that's going to affect the performance climbing the hill as well. And this is, where the automated manuals have a big advantage.
I don't often.
Not only that, Joe, we go into this and everybody always asks you, how it is. Well, how does it pull? Well, last I saw, most of our country's flat, and where it's not flat, half of it's downhill. So the least amount of what I do during the day is go uphill. But all anybody wants to talk about is 80,000 pounds and uphill.
Well,
I don't know where they run, but
this is what a driver remembers. That's the most work, and so it sticks in their mind. And in a manual, you miss a gear climbing a hill with a heavy load, things get a little goofy, and so you just remember that. It sticks in your mind. But today, I don't even think about that stuff anymore, and Henry, I'm sure you don't either. So it's kind of odd to us when people are asking us that question. Who cares? The transmission takes care of it, and it does a good job.
I say all the time that I don't like to make predictions about things, mostly because I don't like being wrong. And when you're going to start predicting things, you're probably going to be wrong at some point. But I will say that going back to the late 90s, I think 99, somewhere around 98 or 99 was that first partially automated transmission. Remember the top two?
Yep.
The first automated
Top
transmission
two.
only automated the last shift. The top two gears was the only thing that transmission could shift by itself, because there was some statistic that's like 90% of your shifting when you're going down the road is just between those top two gears. You hit a little rise, you need a little more gearing, you drop a gear. So they made it automated then. And I said, people hated them. People hated the whole idea of them. They fought against these things. I bought my first one in 01, early on. And I said, look, these aren't perfect. They're going to have some problems. But I said, there will be a time where we're not going to be shifting trucks anymore, because the technology is going to be able to do it so much better than we can. And I wasn't even thinking about shift speed. I was just thinking about shift timing. I could see the time where we were going to come where the engine and the computer were going to be able to tell better than we could what gear the truck should be in. And then when you were talking just recently about the upgrade on the transmission, was one of the things was it shifted faster. I didn't even think about that part.
The clutch throw in the new V-oval I shift it's 50% less. So it has to engage and disengage at shorter distance, and the timing is 30% faster.
That's crazy. That's pretty wild.
Plus, it has the advantage of knowing the input and output shaft speed that no driver can do that as good, no matter how good you are.
And that's what but nobody wanted to hear that, because we know how to shift gears, and that's what we do. But I that is one thing I did see coming, and every time I talked about it, people would scream at me, I'm not driving those sissy trucks.
Kevin,
yeah.
You're ripping their badge honor right off their chest.
I know.
That's what you're doing.
I know.
I mean, you can't do that. I'm the fastest shifter that ever was.
That's right.
Guys wear that like a badge on, and I get it. That is a skill that you acquire over years. I mean, it took me 20 years to get to the point where you just float everything. You don't think about it. You never touch the clutch, and you think, man, I am so good. There's no way a computer can do this. Then you jump into a new I shift, and you're like, oh my god,
yeah.
This is crazy.
Joel, driving these new modern truck like that, you almost, like Dwayne was saying about your car, you almost don't know that the transmission is there anymore.
It's very much like driving a passenger car today.
Yeah.
It very much has that same feel to it, for sure.
Except for it still has a real clutch. And to me, that's an important thing, because people that don't know how to use that right mess up the clutches or wear them out prematurely. I have 3 DT12s that have the original clutch in it, 1.2 million, but yet I've seen them knocked out at 50,000 because they sit at the traffic light, keep taking their foot off the brake and engaging the clutch.
All right.
For sure.
I want to be respectful of Dwayne's time. Is there anything more we want to talk about with Dwayne?
Sure.
Okay. Let's do it then.
Kevin, I think to your other... I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
I think the other point that you were trying to make when you talked about different ratios and the splits between those, just to give you some examples, I think that might be a point to resonate with. A 215, the difference between RPMs between, say, a direct drive and an overdrive in the I shift is 263 RPMs. Okay. 215 is 263. Now you go to a 247. Now the transmission doesn't change, but you have changed the ratio. So the drop in RPMs between those is now 301 instead of 263.
Got it.
And then you go to a 308, and it goes up to 375.
Wow.
So what's happening with these faster ratios, and I think this will probably resonate with you and also your audience, you think about the 18-speed transmission, and you've got your splitter there, right? And all your floating between the two top gears.
Right.
Well, that's essentially what that 215 is doing, except it's doing it all the way through every gear.
That is you're right. That resonates really well Anybody who's been driven a 10 speed and then even switched to a 13, where now you can split a gear up top and you feel how different that is. Imagine being able to split every gear like that with that small of a drop. And here was my biggest criticism of 18-speed transmissions forever. And nobody ever really explained this to me. I would have people on the line, oh, no, I wouldn't have anything but a 18-speed. And I would say, how often do you split the bottom half of the transmission? And the answer was almost always never, never. What do you mean never? Why do you want this transmission that can split all these gears when you don't do it?
Gear.
Right. And nobody ever really explained to me why everybody loved these things, but then didn't use the only difference. You're not splitting all these gears. What's the point?
So here's another thing to think about, and Dwayne, feel free to slap me upside the head if I'm off base on this, but I got thinking about this last night. So when we do the closer steps in the transmission, this adds potentially extra rotating mass into the transmission, extra lubricating oil. There's a whole bunch of things because we make the transmission more complicated. When we aggressively downspeed, now we get the same benefits of the 18 speed, but with a much simpler, more efficient transmission. And I think this is part of the secret sauce of why Travis goes out in the middle of December for the month and knocks down 10.5 miles a gallon. We're not churning a bunch of oil. We're not turning a bunch of gears we don't need to, but we have the exact same benefit that close gear step in 18 speed provides with traditional gearing without all the complication involved. And when you really sit and think about that, that's a big deal, especially when you're trying to improve fuel efficiency, but you want the performance as well.
That sounds right to me. And we can go back to why this is so much better. Even at the top end, we're saying, with this smaller step, you're going to shift more often, and the driver wouldn't want to do that. That's exactly why nobody used an 18 speed the way it was designed. Nobody split every gear because you couldn't. My God, you'd never get anywhere if you were trying to waste all your time splitting every gear. But it's doing it for you now.
A large portion of people ran a 13 as a 9.
Absolutely, right.
But hey, look, your testosterone level jumped 50 points the second you bought an 18 speed, right? And that's what, let's face it, that's what it was for. And the majority of apps. Now we're going to get a heavy haul guy that's going to call in, and we're going to get an off-road guy. I get it. There is a time and a place for it. But for the majority of on-highway trucks, it's a bragging thing.
Hey, Joel,
that's all it was.
I'll go back and say, yes, there were some operations where the 18 speed probably made sense. No doubt. Heavy haul, Specialized, that kind of stuff. Most trucks with 18 speeds, I thought it was a total waste of money, of time, of weight, of everything else. But let's talk about today. When you say maybe there's a need for the 18 speed, compare it to the 14 speed and tell me how it's better.
You ain't going to get that out of me. I'm a believer in that 14 speed. I absolutely love it. And, I drove 13s and 18s forever, and you could not give me one now that I've been on that 14 speed.
How can you?
Them low crawler gears.
I second that.
Absolutely. How could you look at the two and go, well, the 18 speed I need because of all this weight that I pull? No, that's the beauty of this 14 speed. It covers everything. Covers you really good down at the low end, better than an 18 speed. It's got lower gears, and we have 3 highway gears we can run highway speed. Really, this was like the holy grail of transmissions, in my opinion.
You won't get an argument out of me.
Yeah. Dwayne, did we get anything wrong there?
No, you guys are spot on there. You are right there.
Good. All right. What's next?
So this is just something I think we need to keep in mind. Kevin, you always go back to the point where we're talking about mechanical engines, and we're talking about some guys are still running transmissions with auxiliary, separate from the main box. And then we've got, the first generation of electronic engines with a typical 13 or 18 speeds. And so we've got a lot of different generations and kind of genres that we have to cover. And sometimes when we apply things that we talk about that, we're doing on Purple Haze, or we're doing something, and somebody wants to try to apply that on an older truck and it doesn't work out so well, there's generally reasons for that. You may be able to duplicate the gearing, but maybe you're not duplicating the power curve, or there may be other things going on there, or you may be creating yourself a whole lot of work doing it with a manual transmission that you weren't bargaining for as well. You get the thing out on the road, and I done that. Years ago, I had an old FLD 112 with a 3176 cat that was a 308 direct drive 10-speed, and I pulled it out and I put a 13 in it, and it done well fuel mileage wise, but I was proud of it, so I didn't mind. But I was working my ass off driving that truck. But it was crazy. But I was young and dumb, and I thought I was cool. All right, I could make this work, and I did. It was an 8.5, 9 mile a gallon truck back in the day, and that was a big deal. Ultimately, I was working my ass off to achieve that, and that's what you really got to think about. When you're playing with some of these older trucks and you want to kind of mimic what's going on with the newer stuff, you might be creating yourself some extra work that you need to think about that.
Well, that brings up a good point, because I've been doing this long enough. And I will say right now, my Tuesday and my Friday show, because that's when we talk about these kinds of issues, have become far more complicated, and they continue to get complicated all the time. I have to explain different scenarios on turbo boost and on this issue. And one of the things, remind me, before we get off today, can we just get a little clarity on the crankshaft damper on a Volvo engine?
Sure.
Okay. Just remind me. I want to come back to that.
We can do that.
So I have all these different scenarios. So I have to stop and say, no, wait a minute. I know on the last call I said that, but we have to, it's not the same answer now. We're talking about a totally different generation of trucks and technology. And I have to keep explaining this. I go back long enough doing this that I remember when the most complicated thing I had to explain, and I had to explain it a lot, was why, even though whoever taught you how to drive, you probably beat you over the knuckles with a stick when you let the RPM drop too low, right? Isn't that how we were taught? Because a mechanical engine, you let it start to lug, was what we taught, too low of RPM, too much throttle, it's lugging, black smoke's pouring out the stack. And all you're doing is creating fuel dilution and wiping out your bearings. That was the problem back then. And we didn't, nobody explained why. I had to learn that myself, but I was taught, do not let this thing lug. Don't put your foot in the throttle if you don't have enough RPM. And I had to explain to people with electronic engines, that issue is gone. It doesn't matter anymore. We shouldn't talk like that. You shouldn't think like that. But that was it. That was about the only thing. Now, every year since then, the differences I have to keep trying to explain get more complicated, and there's more of them.
Well, things are more finely controlled today than they used to be. You look at the old mechanical pumps, and it was just dumping fuel based on throttle response. Today we use software to put the amount of fuel in, so it never puts in more than what the engine will ever burn.
Right.
So I think that's the advantage there, and that's what allows you to be able to lug engines like they were previously without washing out the bearings like you're referencing.
Yeah. The other thing I've talked a lot about, and Dwayne, you'll appreciate this. If we go back to when we were talking about this, mechanical engines, even the first generations of electronic engines, most of the way the engine was built or the technology, most of it was all either identical. We were building drivetrains in any truck out of the same components. If I wanted to build a Kenworth with a Cat, I could, or I could build it with a Detroit or a Cummins. I could choose an Eaton transmission or maybe a Spicer. We mixed and matched. They were Mr. Potato Head trucks. You just put whatever parts in there you wanted,
right?
But they were all the same. I mean, if you knew how to work on an Eaton transmission, you knew how to work on a Spicer. If you knew how to work on a Cat, you could figure out a Cummins. That today, from bumper to mud flap, these trucks are so proprietary in all their technology, and they're all different. And you can't know all of this stuff anymore.
No, and it even goes to another extent. Joe and I were talking about this earlier here. We're talking about gearing, we're talking about engines, but there's more that comes with this that most people don't look at. One is the fuel map is significantly different from engine manufacturer to engine manufacturer, where that sweet spot's going to be, what that torque curve is going to look like. You know, a Freightliner engine is going to perform different than a Volvo or a Mack engine, and a Pete will do the same thing. So how you gear one engine versus the other, there is a significant difference.
Right.
Now, the other side of that coin is things like we don't think about aerodynamics. We don't think about, you know, the drag coefficient of a trailer, you know, the rolling resistance of the trailer tires, the thing that the trailer doesn't have aerodynamics on it. Those all affect fuel economy, elevation, temperature, humidity. All those play a game in this whole concept. If you look at the new Volvo, because of the new aerodynamics, we've actually reduced the required horsepower that it's required to pull a load down the road because it's no longer pushing air.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example. So if you look at, say, today, a long nose conventional tractor, in aerodynamic consumption, it consumes approximately 144 horse just because of it's pushing air down the road. You know, the big flat nose. I mean, they're beautiful trucks. Don't get me wrong. I love them to death. But then you look at an aerodynamic truck today, and the drag coefficient with the new Volvo, that same truck pulling the same load requires 77 less horsepower.
You know,
that's freaking amazing when you stop and think about it.
It is, Dwayne. This has been a huge part of the show forever. I worked with Volvo pretty closely back in the 90s. I did a seminar series for years. Overdrive magazine put it on. Volvo was the big sponsor. It was called Partners in Business. I did the presentation, and there was a time where we had a panel and we had a Volvo engineer up there, and we were talking about aerodynamics. And I had been testing fuel mileage for a long time by that point. And I would make the statement, if we spec the truck as good as you possibly can, engine, gears, everything's right, rolling resistance is low, we're doing everything we possibly can, we've maximized the fuel mileage, and then you drop a classic body style on top of that build. Or we put, and back then I would use the Volvo because they were really getting into the aerodynamics. I said, if we build that truck with the classic body on it, and let's say we've maximized everything, we actually get 7 miles to the gallon, which back then would have been a big thing with the classic. I said, if we just pull that body off and drop a Volvo body on it, we will gain 1 mile per gallon. And there have been times with fuel prices that 1 mile per gallon is about $10,000 a year in fuel cost. I mean, that's what I used to say. I used to say, look, everything else about your truck can be exactly the same as it is right now. All we're changing is the way it looks. Nothing else. These aren't more functional trucks. They don't have better visibility. They don't maneuver as well. We could talk about it, but if all we want to do is compare the aerodynamics, you're paying $10,000 a year to make your truck look different. That's all you're doing.
Yep.
And something else to keep in mind on this. Go ahead, Henry.
How much has it changed? Because as Joel knows, I'm kind of known for moving along briskly just because of my runs. Right. That old figure that they had, a tenth of a mile to the gallon drop for every mile an hour, like on my new aerodynamic truck and trailer and everything, I don't see that same, what they say, a tenth for every mile to the gallon, and that was never right anyway because aerodynamics works on a bell curve. So
it does.
How much has that changed that figure? That's not even nowhere near close to correct anymore, the tenth of a mile to the gallon per mile an hour.
Yeah, Henry, I haven't done that calculation, but I could. It's going to take more than this show to do that. But yes, it is not linear in fashion. You know, the faster you go, essentially, the more horsepower it takes, and that's the thing that a lot of people don't think about. They don't look at aerodynamics as a fuel savings. I mean, we kind of think, yeah, I'll put some aerodynamics on it, it'll help out with fuel economy. But what essentially you're doing is reducing that required horsepower to pull the load. So every time you round a fender or you put an aerodynamic component on it, if it's fitted to the truck and designed properly, you're reducing that required horsepower. So I'll give you a rough idea. So fuel economy, when it's programmed in the engine, is based on a certain gram of fuel per horsepower per hour. Now I can't give you that number; it's specifically proprietary. But it's a gram per horsepower per hour. What that is. So the more horses you decide to use, the more grams of fuel you will consume. I know that's not a liquid measurement, that's a weight measurement. But if you don't have aerodynamics on it, it's going to require more horsepower. Therefore, you're going to burn more grams of fuel. If you want to charge up a hill, it's going to require more horsepower. Therefore, you're going to burn more grams of fuel. If you want to pull more weight, same concept. So that's just kind of how you should look at that. Anytime you can reduce that required horsepower, the less fuel you're going to burn.
Hey, Dwayne, you made a
and
statement.
I really like playing with aerodynamics because, I used to race NASCAR, late model stock and all that, and you realized how much of a difference it made just taping off your brake ducts for a qualifying lap.
Hey, Dwayne, you made a statement earlier, and I understand why you made it. You said people don't think enough about aerodynamics. Let me tell you how much we think about it on this show. And Henry's kind of the crazy one on this, but we talk about it all the time. We talk about aerodynamics. We look at products. What can we do to improve it? When I heard Henry say the license plate on his trailer, when you look at most license plates on the trailer, the way they're bolted to the frame, they hang down into the wind stream. Henry moved his license plate. That's how much we think about aerodynamics on this show.
Well, Dwayne, they laughed at me at DTNA out at Portland when I did that, right? And then they started doing a little bit of figuring. And they said, "What do you figure that is?" And I forget what I said. I said, "I don't know, 300 to 600." But when they started figuring out a little bit with that computational fluid dynamics, they said, with fuel where it was at the time, which was $3.70 a gallon, it came up to about, they said, somewhere between $400 and $700 every 100,000 miles to have your license plate there. And where my point is, you would raise immortal hell if they raised our trailer tag up $400 to $700 a year, but yet we hang it in the air.
So here's a twist to all this that Dwayne, Peter Blond actually put me onto this. So I had noticed when I was playing with aerodynamics that I was not getting the consistent result that, they said, okay, it should increase it X amount in this situation or X amount in that situation. There was a whole lot of variability to it. And so we had these discussions about, okay, if we're going to lower the horsepower required, now think about what we can do to our gearing, which is also going to reduce pumping losses in the engine at the same time. So when you do them both, say, okay, I've got a real aerodynamic truck. We drop, what Dwayne say, 77 horsepower because of the aerodynamics. Now I can change the rear axle ratio and drop another 28 horsepower off of that. So now we're getting close to 100 horsepower. So now Henry's, when he was running his 400 horsepower downsped Detroit, and he would say, yeah, I was running with a guy that has 500 horsepower. This is exactly why.
Right.
Very efficient through the powertrain. You don't, peak horsepower is great. I mean, everybody loves horsepower. I get it. But you have to use it efficiently, and you have to be smart about how you're using it, or it's just going to cost you a bunch of money.
Yep.
And I think too often we think horsepower is money in the bank, and it's going to reduce fuel consumption. I think most owner-operators are of the opinion, if I have enough horsepower, I get up the hill faster, so I use less fuel because I'm up the hill faster. That's kind of the mindset.
Hey, real quick.
It doesn't work that way.
Dwayne, how long do we have you for?
I can hang for the remainder of your time.
Okay. Do you mind taking calls? I think that having you here right now, you and Joel and Henry just disappeared. I don't know what happened. As I was about to say Henry's name, and I looked up and I'm like, well, Henry isn't there anymore. On
Sure.
Fridays, everybody loves to call with Volvo specific questions because I can answer some of them, but Joel can answer more of them. And having you here, this might be fun if you'd be willing to take some calls.
Depending on the topics, I may be able to add some
Yeah, well,
clarity.
that's the beauty of this show. There are times where the question might be, Henry can answer it better because he has more experience than I do, or sometimes I've got some insight into things, or Joel does. That's the beauty of having us all on this show. Having you here, and it's the same thing on our Tuesday show when we're talking mechanical stuff. There are four of us. One guy's an electrical engineer, and somebody else has been turning wrenches for 50 years, and it really helps us answer all the questions. I used to
Sure.
have a big enough ego that I thought I could do this show all by myself, and I could learn all this stuff, and I could answer all the questions. And in some ways I can, but it would be kind of like that. Yeah, if somebody challenges me on one of these things, I might not be able to explain it well. So I realized, look, I cover a lot of topics. I can direct traffic and add some color commentary, but there's always going to be somebody that knows more about something than I do. And if I can bring them in here, one, I'm going to learn, and it's good for our audience. So yeah, we get
Sure.
questions all the time and here's the other thing. If I don't know an answer, I'm just going to tell you I don't know an answer. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. So let's do that then. Let's get started in South Dakota. Brett, you get a twofer today. You get Joel and Dwayne.
All right.
Go ahead. What do you got?
How does so I'm up here in cold country. How does the fuel go through the engine and then back to the tank? I'm coming out of a cat, which returned a lot of warm fuel back to the tank. I was just kind of curious how it all works with the Volvo.
You're going to go through ECM. It's just simply going to pump through the head, through the injector rail, keep the ECM warm, and then just circulate itself right back to the tank.
Yeah,
right. Okay. Yes, I understand.
Were you asking like for a specific? I mean, as far as I know, all engines return fuel back to the tank. I'm sure there's some variation in how much and maybe the pathways. Are you looking for something more specific than that?
Well, just kind of like now that it's starting to get cold, do I need to burn my fuel to keep it from gelling up, or is there enough return that I can get by, not burning it per se?
So I can tell you on my personal experience with a Volvo and 52 degree below, as long as the diesel fuel is treated for those conditions, you should not have a problem. I mean, it runs just fine. I've never had a problem in extreme cold temperatures. I've always had treated fuel for the conditions, but as far as the truck generating enough, we don't return a whole lot of fuel compared to some of the other manufacturers. We probably have a lower flow rate, but I've never had a problem gelling up. One of the things that I typically find when and this is something that I've seen over the years, maybe it's more of an opinion, but when you have a high flow rate with warmer fuel that's returning, you tend to see water condensing in the fuel tank, and that sometimes creates an issue, having too much warm fuel coming in. And then if you do happen to shut the truck off, you have a whole lot of problems and you have to keep it running. I have been problem free with mine since 2006 is when we started running Volvo Power, and I've never had a freeze up or a gel up issue with a Volvo Power.
All right, that sounds good. That's all I needed for now.
All right.
All righty.
Thanks for the call. Henry's back. Henry, what happened?
I was fueling up the truck, and when I walked in, I lost my signal.
Oh, all right.
That'll do it.
we have another.
And we were talking about my favorite subject, aerodynamics, which was driving me crazy.
Yeah. We have somebody else coming in too on the guest line. Was Alec possibly going to be calling in today?
He may have.
His area
Yunsu
code,
just called in.
his area code isn't 312 though, is it?
No, I know who that is. That's Yunsu with McAfee.
Really?
Yep.
How did somebody talk to
I
him?
just
about-
shared with the podcast number.
Oh, okay. Okay. I can tell because a guest comes in on a totally different line than I usually know.
Oh,
who should be showing
he was
up.
wanting to listen in.
Oh, that's
He
fine.
was wanting to listen in, and I said,
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And he can hang out there. We've got lines, and I think he's gone now. We'll see. If he wants to hang out, he can. I thought, was I supposed to have a guest that I didn't know about? Because sometimes that happens too.
Been there, done that.
I know that happens too. Like, what do you mean I have a guest today? All right. So let's grab another call. Let's go to Mississippi. Matt, welcome to the program.
Hey, good morning. First, thanks Joel and Dwayne for Wednesday's presentation. That was quite eye-opening.
Yeah, it was.
So I have a son who's in college for mechanical engineering right now, and I thought about bringing him in on this to see if we could help him in his education and all that.
Yeah.
But it's a little busy right now with him anyway, trying to get last stuff done here before Christmas break. But
got it.
So you guys touched on everything I was going to talk about. With the transmission, I think is the bigger disconnect from the old school to the new school.
Right.
Because with the 13 and 18 speeds, there is a truth to the fact that certain gear ratios, you will have a bigger loss when you're up-stepping your gears because of the splitter in the back box. So we'll just use 13 speeds to keep the math are simpler. But in 13th gear, you drop that half gear, you're losing efficiency in the transmission. So when Henry says a lot of times he's in between rear axle gears, I think that's part of the problem. And since I'm driving, I can only go with numbers off the top of my head. So old school, we'd have a 355 rear end ratio, which if you dropped from 13th to 12th, that'd be very similar as to putting a 308 in.
Mm-hmm.
Or going all the way to a 264 and dropping down to 11th and direct. Well, a lot of people went to that, 308 or 320 something gear or 336, which is kind of, I'm going to call it an in-between gear. They would have been much better off going all the way to a 264.
Yeah, we said that for years.
When you
yeah.
split that transmission, you're actually creating a loss just in the transmission.
So one of the issues with the 264 coming out with the manual transmission with the OEMs, they were right on the edge with their startability with them.
Right.
I mean, it's right on the edge. And they knew that if the driver was going to use it effectively, he's going to be working a lot harder.
Yeah.
And the majority of drivers, think about a company driver, or an owner operator that really isn't into fuel efficiency, doing that 264, you had the potential to blow up in their face. I don't disagree with what you're saying. It probably would have been a good idea in terms of just pure fuel efficiency, but there's some other things that you really have to think about there. And you're right, it's not only the efficiency loss in the gearing. A few years ago, when we had the big blow up online about 18 speeds and power flow and all this bullshit, the guys from Eaton were actually watching that whole discussion, and I called the guy that I knew, and he said, yeah, I saw that whole thing. And he said, look, we just got a whole bunch of oil in these manual transmissions. He said that is the primary efficiency robber. You're pumping a whole bunch of oil that we're not pumping in today's transmissions. They also have square cut gears, which are technically more efficient, or straight cut gears, I guess is the terminology, but they have to be much bigger to carry the horsepower than a helical cut gear. So now you've got more rotating mass as well.
Right.
And, you know, I guess it's not fair to call them antiques, but, you know, we've gotten much better over the years, and
right.
and engineering has really advanced. And when we put a manual transmission in a truck that has a very fuel efficient spec, the driver works harder, and you never get the full fuel efficiency because of the transmission.
Right.
And you know, I know I'm going to get hate mail because of that, but that's just a fact.
Yep.
And this is exactly why all the guys that love the 13 and 18 speed Eatons, you know, this is why Eaton came out with the Endurance. This is exactly why.
Right.
You know, when you look at the Endurance, it's still a twin countershaft transmission, but it has all helical cut gears. They've done a very nice job managing the oil flow in the transmission. It has a planetary secondary in the back. Yeah, so they did do a nice job with that transmission. I'm still think I prefer a single countershaft. I think the I-shift right now today probably shifts faster than anything else on the market. I think everybody else will probably follow suit on that, I'm assuming, especially as we start to leverage gear ratios. We're seeing Navistar come out with a very similar setup as to Volvo. I have driven that truck multiple times. They're on the right path, there's no doubt. I think that's going to be a very good powertrain for them. It needs some refinement yet. I am hearing that, you know, Cummins redesigned some of their rotating assembly in their engine that kind of mimics what Volvo does as far as the rod geometry and with some of the stuff on the crankshaft, and they're talking about doing faster ratios, you know. So this is the future. There is no doubt. And you know, as we refine all the little moving parts involved here, it's going to get better and better and better. And this has been probably the biggest thing that has kept downsped powertrains, you know, kind of out of the owner operator market, was the driving experience. And Matt, you had mentioned this as well, that, you know, there are times when a downsped powertrain just doesn't have the accelerator response, or that doesn't have this or doesn't have that. And that's been to a large part true. You know, I've been working with Dwayne on a project that I want to put together that really addresses all those problems. And they've done it through the faster shifting I-shift. So we have better acceleration off the line, which is what a lot of people will complain about on a downsped truck. It also, we're addressing it with the power curve of the engine, where, you know, when we're not running downsped, when we really need the power and we're back a couple gears in the box, we're still going to have some power there that's going to be on par, or maybe even slightly better than a traditional powertrain. You know, Kevin, you talk about it all the time. 3 gears available at highway speed. What does that mean? It means a whole lot if you have the power curve that works at low and high RPM. And Volvo just came out with an engine that does that. That 500 1950. We've got very good power down low, and we've got very strong power on the high end now as well. And to me, that will really, I think, open up the owner operator market. Now, we have to go through a bunch of testing to make sure that everything's going to work the way that we think it's going to work. But on paper, it looks very, very promising. And so I don't want everybody to go out and try to order a 500 1950 yada, yada, yada yet. I mean, we're not to that point yet, but we're getting closer every day to making that a reality. And there will come a point when we're going to jump in one of these trucks and it's going to outperform a traditional spec truck running through the hills with 80,000 pounds, and it's going to get significantly better fuel efficiency doing it.
Well, what was brought up a little bit ago was those in-between gears, like with the DD15, and I blame the dealers on this with how they've traditionally, for years, we've been down speeding since I started driving back in '83. I remember them coming in and talking to us, well, now these are the lower RPM, so it's been happening for a while. But they always took them one gear ratio set at a time. And like with the DD15, the 285 with the overdrive, or the 228. I nicknamed those two gears tween because it wasn't really good at being downsped, and it wasn't good at pulling, and it sat right in between and did neither well. If you jumped all the way to the 216 direct or the 264 overdrive, then you were back in business again. And when it fell down a gear, you were where you wanted to be. But when you have those 228s or 285s, it tries to hang in there and pull a little bit longer. But then when it downshifted, you were geared too low. So
Yes.
I nicknamed those gear sets tween because they weren't good at either.
Right. And this is something that me and Dwayne, we talk about every night. I mean, literally, we're on the phone every night talking about this. I mean, his wife probably wants to kill me, but we are talking about this every single night. We do not want this to happen. We need to have linear power from 900 all the way out to 1600, no dead spots. Everything needs to work. I kind of give the feedback. Dwayne does the math, and then we go back and we try it again, and then until we get it right. I'm taking Purple Haze 1, a 205 gear set's going in it over the Christmas break here. Does it have the correct power curve to get the full advantage of 205? No, it's a 455 1850. Am I going to be able to learn some things that I can feed back to Dwayne to verify, okay, this is how I think it's going to work with a 500 1950, and then we can do some more math and put that truck together and make sure that it meets our expectations. This is how it works. You know, a lot of math, a lot of trial and error, a lot of feedback, and it's just constant every day. You know, I know a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, you got the best job. It's just the test drive. It's a lot of work. I'm telling you, it is a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. Hey, we're gonna grab another call. Let's go to Tennessee. Ilya, welcome.
Good morning, Kevin. How's it going?
Good. What's on your mind? Oh, you got an oil sample we want to look at, huh?
Yep.
All right, let's see here. So 672,000 miles on a, this is a D13, right?
Yep.
Roughly 89,000 miles on this oil for this sample. Good look. Are you using Catalyst?
Yeah.
Okay, so the iron's a little high, but we can ignore that because that's just the Catalyst. They flag chromium at 2. That's no big deal. It's pretty normal wear at this many miles. Tin, the same thing. Little bit of increase in tin this time, up to 5. What's happening here is you're out at 90,000 miles. These wear metals build up over time, and you're just building up a tiny amount here. Those I wouldn't worry about the wear metals at all. They flagged boron. Just ignore that completely. It's meaningless. It's an additive. I wish I've said it many times. I wish they would just take that whole section off the oil sample. I've never used it. The one issue you've got, the easy fix here is your base is not holding up. The longer we go on this oil, the lower your base is. That's what we expect. That is a consumable part of the package. The base gets consumed over time. The good news is now it's easy to add base. We used to say you got to drain some oil out, put some fresh oil in. We don't need to do a whole oil change because your oil is still very serviceable. So the good news now is you can just buy a base additive, and it'll tell you right on the bottle. Pittsburgh Power carries a base additive. It'll tell you right on the bottle the formula. If your number's here and you want to move it up by 4 or 5 points, here's how much of this you put in. And that's all you're going to need to do. You're down at 1.4. No acid is showing up yet, but that might happen here soon. But all you need to do is just drop some base into this.
Okay.
Hey guys.
Yeah.
I've got something for you while we're on oil that I just learned the other day. At least I think I learned this. I think this is accurate.
Okay.
I'm going to run it by you and see if anybody's ever heard this.
Okay.
So when you look at a 5W30, a 1030, a 1540, the bigger the gap between the first and second number there, the faster that oil is likely to shear and come out of spec and oxidize. So a 1030 will be more shear resistant than a 1540 or a 530. Because I guess the molecules have to wind up and unwind, and when you have a bigger gap between the numbers, the molecules get longer. The way this was explained, and they're easier to temporarily shear and permanently shear. The bigger the gap between those numbers.
So, okay, and I want to come back to that. One of the things I will say is one of the problems I almost never see is oxidation. And when we do, there's usually a reason. We've got a hot spot in the engine somewhere. Something's really overheating. We get a lot of oxidation then. Not a big problem. So that may be a true statement. I just don't know how relevant it is when I'm looking at oil samples.
Sure.
But then I'd also have to ask this, because you started talking about molecules lining up. Now, when I was talking to the oil engineers, and I asked them to explain to me what is the difference between a synthetic and a conventional oil. And he said, here's the best way I can describe it to you. If you take cooked pasta and you stir it all around and the strands are all wrapped around each other and you drop that in a bowl, that's conventional oil. He said, take the pasta, the spaghetti noodles in a box when they're rigid and they're all lined up. That's synthetic oil. He said that's what we do. And by doing that, what you do is you make the film thickness less, and that means less drag in the engine. It's a thinner film, but it protects better. So even though it's a thinner film, it protects better because all the molecules are lined up, and that provides better protection. He said that's not exactly correct, but that's the best way I can tell you what the differences are. So hearing that, does this now have an impact on that? If it's synthetic, is the difference smaller because the molecules are supposedly lined up already?
Yeah, supposedly synthetics are more shear stable than conventional motor oils. I think that's probably a fairly safe statement to make. And I'm not an oil expert, but I'd say that's fairly safe statement to make. And then, he said you would look at the grades, and the ones with the closer numbers will be even more shear stable. And the wider they get, now you get some advantages wider because you have a wider operating temperature range. But if you don't need that range, you want to keep those numbers as close as possible.
Aren't we looking at oils in cars now that are 0.5?
0.8 is what I have seen in a Toyota.
0.8. Now now if you think about that, not only is that a really thin oil, it also, those two numbers are closer together than it's the second number we're looking at. Well, it's both numbers. Even though we've made that really a thin oil, it's a synthetic, but we actually brought those two numbers closer together.
Hey, Dwayne, when we talked about this, a week ago or so, you had mentioned that people don't really realize the difference that the viscosity of the oil makes in terms of horsepower in the engine. Do you have any general guidelines on like a 1540 versus a 530 on the amount of horsepower difference you see just circulating that oil?
We see about a 1% difference in fuel economy between the two, between say a 5W30 versus a 10W. So you're seeing about a 1% difference in there. Can I convert that to horsepower? Yeah, I could. It is going to be resistance, and I think it's one of those things that most people don't think about when we think about fuel efficiency. Again, it's all about reducing that required horsepower, and that's one way to do it.
Yeah, Dwayne, again, on this show, it is a really, really monumental day if we think of one more thing we can do to improve fuel economy. just like I was saying earlier, like Henry moving his license plate. We experimented for a while with taking the airline from the boost off of the compressor and putting its own filter on the compressor so the compressor could suck air out of the atmosphere and not rob it from our boost. I mean, that's the kind of stuff we play around with on to try to find more fuel mileage.
Okay.
We've gotten a little crazy on some stuff, but it's pretty interesting. We figured some stuff out over the years too.
They went to a naturally aspirated air compressor instead of a turbocharged one.
There you go.
If you look
I
at
had
the
another-
average aerodynamic truck today, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off here, but if you look at the average aerodynamic truck today going over, pretty flat terrain, you're right at about 150 horse that it consumes. So if you're looking at a 1% fuel savings on that, that's about 1.5 horse just by changing oil.
Yeah. So here's another thing that I think that we talk about boost all the time. And back in the day we watched a boost gauge, and I think that was the correct thing to do. So how does gearing tie into boost? And a lot of things that I'm learning on Purple Haze 1 and expect to kind of optimize on Purple Haze 2 is we're limiting horsepower through gearing instead of doing it by the computer. And when we do it this way, it's much more intuitive to the driver when they understand how the gear train is set up. So when I'm down around 850, 900 horse or 900 RPM, I'm roughly in that 325 horsepower range. Dwayne, what does it take to move 80,000 pounds at say 60 mile an hour? How much horsepower does that take?
At 60 miles an hour? So 80,000 pounds with your rig today. Bear with me. I'll do the calculation here real quick.
You notice he's not guessing. He's going to give an exact answer.
and while he's doing the math, you see, Joel, once again, you're the problem holding everybody up.
Yep.
At 60 miles an hour, it's 151 horse that it's going to require. Now, if you're doing a 6x2, it's 151 horse.
Okay, so when you think about this, and I posted a little graphic that kind of demonstrated this as well. So we're going down the road in Purple Haze, and I've got it bumped up into overdrive, and that engine will only make 300 horsepower, but I'm on flat ground. I only need 150 to keep it running. So if I had traditional gear, say 308, I would have probably close to 500 horsepower available, or 450-ish available, even though I'm not using it until, you're on the cruise and you hit a little rise in the road. So with the traditional gearing, yes, you got to watch that boost gauge, because it's going to start climbing, and it's going to climb fast and hard. It's going to give you all that 450 horsepower. With Purple Haze, when I'm in overdrive, I'm done at 300, and that's all it's going to give, because mechanically it can't give you anymore. It's limited. So I don't have to watch that boost gauge. I can leave it in cruise control, and it's only going to make enough boost to make 300 horsepower. And when you start to add that little rise, the horsepower calculation goes up. It matches really, really nicely for the majority of, relatively flat interstates. The little rises, it's going to require, 300 horsepower to get up and over. And this is one of the reasons that I don't have to babysit the boost gauge. No. Because we're doing it, the gearing is mechanically limiting the horsepower and thereby limiting the boost to a certain degree. Now, we talk about, as we're down in RPM and we want to make horsepower, one of the ways that we do that is to put more boost to it, different fuel duration. There's a lot of things that come into play there. And this is why sometimes watching the boost gauge on a newer truck can be very misleading. You see it, I'm down at 800 RPM. I'm making 16, 17, 18 pounds of boost. That's not a bad thing. For efficiency, that's not a bad thing at all. It's better than making the downshift, maybe bringing it down to 7 or 8 pounds of boost, but I'm running, now I'm at 1150 RPM. That piston, that's all drag. That's all consuming fuel. That's not where you want to be. So higher boost at lower RPM, in my mind, that's efficiency.
Well, I think there's another.
Dwayne, why we have you there, we'll go back to this afterwards, but I don't want to forget about it. On going to a 6x2 versus a 6x4, not turning the differential, the interaxle differential, and the intermediate drive shaft. How much reduction in necessary horsepower is it from doing that? Because anybody that's ever turned a pinion gear, they don't turn easy.
Yeah, so there's about a 3% difference in that, as far as turning the gears itself. It's roughly about 10 horsepower.
All right.
Yeah,
Hey,
I thought it might have been more than that, but
I just looked up and
I'm
wondered
sorry,
why we had
14.
wondered why we had 6 hosts today. Ilya's still with us. Ilya, anything else we can help you with? We got a little off track there. All right, you're welcome. Was going to bring him in as a host. We've had him sitting there so long. We've got some more calls. I do want to cover this real quick because this has been something on my mind, and I was going to go do the research, but I could probably get it figured out right now. So here's another area where we've talked a lot: crankshaft dampers. Nobody in the industry ever talked about replacing these things. We just assumed it's just that giant hunk of metal sitting on the front of our engine spinning. What could possibly go wrong? And it was Bruce, similar to what we're doing now. Bruce was working with Cummins pretty closely. He had engineers he worked with, and he was at the factory and he was walking around, and he actually saw a cutaway of a crankshaft damper. And he said, what's with all this? And they explained what's in there, and how this is supposed to work, and the fact that after about 5 years, these things aren't working anymore. And if I remember right, there was silicon inside, and then graphite, maybe another. And over time, the graphite impregnates into the silicon, and then the silicon gets hard, and it no longer becomes a shock absorber. And that's what the crankshaft damper is. It's a big shock absorber for the crank. And when it gets hard and it's not shock absorbing anymore, you start seeing brackets break and transmission problems. And Bruce was the first one that brought this to the industry. He's the first one who brought it to me. We talk about it all the time. And now you look at a Volvo engine and there's no crankshaft damper on the front, right?
So there is.
Okay.
Here's how this was explained. This is how this was explained to me. And then I know Dwayne knows a whole lot about vibrations and shock waves, and I'll let him get into the details in this. But this is how this was explained to me in very simple terms. So now, apparently, at one point, Volvo had some engines that had an internal that was in the oil pan, I guess. It was covered up, the damper. It wasn't external. I think today's engines are external, I believe. I'll have Dwayne verify that. But the main advantage I was explained that why Volvo doesn't run into a whole lot of problems, I guess the damper, the amount, I don't know if wear is the right word, but when you get into issues with them wearing out over time, it's the amount of flex and give in that crankshaft. And I was told that is directly related to the journal overlap of the crankshaft. And this is an area that Volvo is kind of world renowned for, is they have a very robust journal overlap on their crankshafts. They typically tend to have a little shorter stroke. And when you have a shorter stroke, that means you almost by default, I think I'm right at saying this, you will have more journal overlap on that crankshaft. That makes it stiffer. It makes it more resistant to vibration. Everything tends to last longer. It's pretty rare to see the bottom end on a Volvo have any type of issue at all because of this journal overlap. Now, that being said, I'll let Dwayne take it from there.
Well, and Dwayne, I'll just say one more thing, that, we were able to kind of verify this over and over and over. I've got videos somewhere of the fact that there was a difference when you changed it. And the difference was, we would even, I think in one of the videos, we set a glass of water on the hood and let the truck idle, and you could see all the turbulence in the water. And then we changed the crankshaft damper and did the same thing, and there was a significant difference. Something was stopping the vibration traveling through the rest of the truck. And the crankshaft damper, the way it was explained, made total sense.
Yeah, so every time the crank rotates, obviously you've got some vibrational forces just simply taking those pistons up and down from reciprocating to a rotary motion. And you're spot on with that. Is that it's just acts as a shock absorber to absorb that rotational force or reciprocating force. So you're not pounding bearings,
Right.
damaging crank and so on and so forth. Is there some possible deterioration in the substrate in the harmonic balancer? Yes, there could be. Do I have data to ultimately conclude this? This is where the engineering part of it comes in. It's like I never speak without data, and really hard to validate without that. So it could deteriorate over a period of time, and it could have less shock absorption through the crankshaft. Now, some of the advantages that are more robust crankshaft or bottom end does is typically there is not as much vibration going through there. Longer crankshafts, smaller diameter crankshafts will typically have more flex to them in both the length of the crankshaft and up and down in the overall crankshaft. So therefore, the harmonics are a little bit different in the harmonic balancer. So it's pretty variable there and really tuned to the engine.
Got it.
Every harmonic balancer is going to be different. I mean, there are engineers that just tune that for engine speeds and weights and so on. So piston weight, stroke, speed, all those come into play into designing that for the truck.
One of the other things that Bruce designed, and it's the only one on the market that I'm aware of. Have you ever seen, Dwayne? I'm asking you. Have you ever seen the dynamic wheel balancers? It's a ring that gets mounted to the hub, and the first one on the market, I think, used like BBs, some kind of shot, and
Yep.
they would spin up and balance the wheel. And then another company came out, and they were mercury filled, which worked even better. It was smoother. Bruce went to that company because he had learned about this balancer, and a new one has a better, less vibration. He had them design the same ring that bolts right onto the crankshaft damper and helps balance that damper.
Yeah, use the same technology. Right. Well, I guess putting beads in a tire, the plastic beads, they have that same concept. So in theory, it should go to to balance it off. The beads will go to the heaviest point. So
right, yeah. So all right,
the concept in science is solid.
Yeah, Matt, what do you got? You still with us? I keep forgetting about the caller. We get off on topics, and I forget we have a caller on the line.
Teflon was the other material inside there.
Oh, was it Teflon?
But it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that the Volvo crankshaft and architecture, the less shock there is,
right,
the longer that's going to last.
Right, and that obviously for Volvo isn't a maintenance item.
I actually had talked to,
but the time frame is longer.
Right, it would be much longer. Correct. I'd actually talked to a guy, Dwayne. I don't know if you're familiar with him, and I can't say his name, but he was directing a bunch of Volvo trucks in a coal mine in Mongolia, and they were hauling just stupid, crazy weight down to a Chinese steel mill. I mean, it was like 500,000 pound loads they were pulling out of this. It was just stupid.
Yeah.
And they had a fleet of Cummins trucks, and then they took a fleet of D16s or 17s, whatever they were over there, and they were running them side by side. And that was the one weak spot of the Cummins, was that damper failure over time. And I think when you look at the crankshaft difference between the two, you could kind of understand why.
Well,
I mean, the D16 crank is just absolutely massive.
Well, and it's no wonder that it was Bruce and Pittsburgh Power that figured this out, because they were building high performance engines that were putting even more stress on this, right?
Yes, and that would make sense.
Right.
That would absolutely make sense.
Speaking of, like, you're talking about the heavy mining equipment, this is totally off topic, but I just saw this yesterday. We've all seen those big giant boring machines that they make the tunnels with. I mean, they have to be like as big as the tunnel's going to be, because that's the the cutting face has to be the size of the tunnel. Many of those, the big jobs, when they're done with those, they bury that machine down there. It's too expensive to try to bring it back up.
Wow.
Yeah, they showed
That's crazy.
they showed this whole thing where they dig this big pit. When they're done with the tunnel, they dig this big pit right outside the tunnel. They drop the thing down in there, and then they fill it with concrete. They fill the hole with concrete.
Wow.
Yeah, and the machine's
That's
down there
crazy.
forever. I know, I thought so too. Can't imagine what it costs to build one of those things, but it's more expensive to try to recover it, to try to get it back out of there.
Yeah.
But
That's
that was,
crazy.
yeah.
Be more economical to make it a tourist trap and
There you go.
Oh, shoot.
Hey, Matt, speaking of which,
back to the
you
18 speed. Go ahead.
You have a pretty cool place up there in northern Minnesota in the Iron Range. You can go down. I forget the number. I'll probably be wrong on this, but I went down. You can go down like 2 miles there somewhere. Maybe it's not 2 miles. That might be ridiculous.
Boy, I don't know the depths off the top of my head of how deep some of them are, but actually I was just reading something about, an interesting history fact type little thing popped up, and the town of Hibbing, Minnesota, they built it, when the mine was 2 miles outside of town. It was just a mining camp.
Right.
Well, as they kept finding better and better ore, they were getting closer and closer to town. And I think it was right after World War One. I don't remember the year, but between World War One and World War Two, it might have been up to World War Two, moved the town because they needed the iron ore that bad.
I'll bet.
They moved the whole town.
I'll bet. I went down one of those a long, long way down. I forget what it was, but it was a long way down. It was pretty crazy. What else you got, Matt?
Yeah. So the 18 speeds, because I ordered one, the salesmen try to talk people into it. They go to high horsepower because the highest 13 speed factory rating is 2050 torque.
Okay.
Whereas 18, you can go to 2250.
Oh,
but
got it.
There's never been a factory engine
right.
more than 2050 anyway, to my knowledge. So it's only if you're planning to upgrade.
Yeah.
But the reason I ordered an 18 speed, and it was behind a 16-liter CAT engine, just the whole driveline was heavier. But I absolutely wanted to be able to split my reverse gear in low range.
Okay.
Because at the time, I
got
pulled
it.
an end dump, and we were building roads.
Right.
And you'd back up a mile at a time for every load. And high rate.
Oh, Matt, we're losing you.
Too slow.
Oh, there you are. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, I could see that. Hey, Dwayne, while we've got you here, this is something I've kind of want. There's probably not a good answer to this, but I'm thinking about, like, what are the kind of safeguards built into engineering when we hear this kind of stuff? This transmission is only rated for this much torque. And we know that, we do things with these. We turn them into racing trucks or pulling trucks or whatever. And we break all kinds of limits then. I've even done it. There was a time where in my operation, I wanted single axle sleeper trucks. And I wasn't buying new trucks at the time. I was buying used trucks. And what I found was single axle sleepers, if you could even find them, you had very little choice and they held their price really well. And I worked out the math that I could buy a tandem axle. I had a shop, my shop, we worked out a deal. If I let them just keep the truck and work on it whenever they wanted, and there was no hurry, and they got all the parts, they would convert my tandem axles to single axles for free. They'd keep the wheels, tires, springs, differential. They'd keep it all, and no hurry, work on it when you want. And they would do it for me at no cost and give me back a single axle. But I was also, I was pulling doubles. It was FedEx. We didn't get heavy often, but we could be 80,000 pounds just like any other truck. And now I'm running that smaller differential that was never designed for that. And people told me, oh, you're just going to tear that thing up. Well, I converted one that had like 60,000 miles on it, took it to 1.3 million, and my differential was still fine. So is there like a standard kind of fudge factor that's built into engineering stuff like this when they give us those limits?
Yeah, I mean, there is some engineering tolerances there that we look at. If we look at like the transmission right now, the I shift, you look over in Europe today, and that 700 horse engine puts out 3,800 Newton meters, which is 2,800 foot-pounds of torque.
Ooh.
Okay, and that's an I shift transmission.
Wow.
So, and that's pretty significant. And then when you look at different axle manufacturers, you've got the different carriers, and whether it's a 40, 46, 52, 58 1,000-pound carrier, those input torques vary, and also the amount of what I want to say drawbar they can pull also varies. So a lot of people think that rear axle ratio is going to have an effect on how much I can pull. Well, if you've got a 40,000-pound axle, there is no pulling rated tow bar difference between a 308 and a 264.
Okay.
Meritor has the same rating for that 40,000-pound axle, regardless of the ratio. Now, you go up to a 46,000-pound axle, well, then the rating of the axle goes up higher. So instead of 80,000 pounds with like a 14X HE, you go up to a MT40, and then you're in that 110,000 pound range. You go up to a 46, and then you can get a little bit higher depending on how it's set up. So those vary. Also, the input torque of the engine also has a factor into that. So, if your engine's putting in 1,450 foot-pounds of torque versus 1,950 foot-pounds of torque, the axle manufacturers will limit the amount of weight the axle can pull based on the input torque.
Got it.
Which Dwayne, I think he was going a different way, though. If you're using half of that 40,000-pound rear axle set and sending all the power to one axle, he was taking the front differential out. And you always hear that if you run a 6x2,
you're splitting the torque between the axles most definitely every time.
But he wasn't.
Right.
He was taking the one out.
And if you go build a single axle tractor at the OEM, you get the heavier differential. I mean, so when you see UPS and all those guys pulling their doubles and triples with single axles, they were built with the heavier differential. I was taking tandem axles and just taking one differential out. So now I have that smaller differential still trying to pull the same amount of weight.
So here,
you're
essentially, go ahead.
You definitely will have put more stress on that ring gear. You look at an S23 175, that's significantly stronger in a single application versus a D40 155 in a Dana situation. That torque is designed to be split over two axles,
right?
Versus one axle.
Yeah, but it worked. And when I would, I talk about it, people would say, "Oh, you're just going to tear up differentials," and I'm sure there's potential for that, but it didn't. I built several of these, and they all went 1 million miles plus. Here's what I've learned so far in this discussion: is that fudge factor really should be stated as engineering tolerances.
Yeah, most definitely. And duty cycles have a big difference.
Yeah, there you go.
Sure.
So they'll also look at, when you're looking at a weight, they'll look at whether you're loaded 100% going out, 100% coming back, or you're loaded going out versus 50% empty coming back. So the amount of weight you're able to pull on that from an axle manufacturer will depend on the duty cycle as well.
Yeah, and the thing at FedEx was we never knew the weight of our trailers. We only knew the percentage they were full, which has nothing whatsoever to do with the weight. No correlation. You might know that your trailer's 100% full. It might be 30% full. And the problem with doubles on that is you would just go by the percentage. If you had, you know, a 100% trailer and a 70% trailer, you'd put the 100% up front and the 70 in the back. And sometimes you'd go down the road and go, oh yeah, that back trailer's pretty darn heavy. And there were times where I would stop and switch them. And that's a lot of work to do. But there were some that just felt so unstable to me, I would take the time to switch them. But for overall, we were probably never anywhere near 80,000 pounds. I mean, that would have been rare for us. Matt, anything else?
Well, I could give Joel a little crap here. Earlier, he said, you know, these older transmissions are almost antiques. It's kind of funny because
see, I knew I'd get
I think I'm the youngest one on this call here.
Yeah,
and I'm the only one driving one of these.
That's
antiques,
right.
So.
That's right.
Well, the reality of how long they've been around, they aren't almost antique.
You're right. Technically, I think they meet the requirements to be called an antique.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And then some.
And the only reason I have an upgrade, well, not the only reason, but this truck would have a newer transmission in it if I could get a manual that would bolt up to the back of my cab.
Yeah.
But I can't get the ice shift to bolt up to this truck. So
right.
There you go.
Otherwise, there'd be one in here.
There you go.
There you go.
All right.
I'll let you move along.
Yep. We're going to grab another call. We're going to go to New York. Jay, welcome.
Hey, how you doing, guys? Thanks
Good.
for all your help.
Yeah. What can we help you with?
I have a question. I wanna let you guys know my scenario. The current truck that we have, what the truck should have been spec'd at, and what a Volvo would be. It's a triaxle trailer. We haul blacktop. We're usually at 80,000 pounds and pull the and when it's empty, we pull the trailer with you know the paver and the rollers. All right. We go up steep hills, dirt, and highway. The average highway speed that we go to when we're on the highway is 70 to 75. The percentage I would say that we're on the highway and local, I would say 70% on the highway, 30% on local roads, and long idle times. It's a Packard, it's a Packard Kenworth T880 with a MX-13. I believe, I can't remember, I think it was a 375 that was in there. When I'm doing 65, she's up at around 1600 RPM.
Oh, ouch.
Why would ideally, if this was, like I said, I know they expect wrong, because I mean, the average mile, it's 4 or 5 miles per gallon that it gets. You know, if it's empty and you go long distance, it might creep up to 6, but, you know, that's rare for us. It's like I said, we're always heavy. So ideally, this engine, and this weight, and like I said, the percentages on and off, what should have been the rear axle?
In a Packard product, I can't answer that for you. But that is a pretty high ratio for you. And you're going 75 miles an hour, did you say?
Yeah, 70 I would say is a better average. 70 miles an hour we're on the highway. High Pro 22.5. Okay. Like I said, we're on a lot of times. You know, when we're paving, we're off the road. You know, going through item 4.
This is where this becomes difficult without being able to see the actual power curve of the engine to know what's going on, where that thing should be running. Now, Dwayne could probably give you an idea if this was all Volvo componentry, you know, where this maybe should be, but it's virtually impossible for us to kind of throw a number out there without understanding where that power curve is on that engine. I have no idea on a Packard myself either. I don't know. You know, go ahead.
The on the tack, all right, between 1,000 and 1,500, there's a few bars where there's a green range, where according to the manual, that's where the ideal range would be for the engine to run efficiently. So and that's like around 12 to 1400. I don't know if that helps.
Okay. Well, something to think about here, and I think this is often misunderstood, and Joel pushes it with down speeding, is the higher you run that engine in RPMs, the more you have in what we call pumping losses. So to give you an example, a 300 increase in RPM is approximately 30 horsepower just to turn the crankshaft, the camshaft, move the components inside of the engine. So anytime that you're running it that high, it's going to consume energy just to rotate that engine. What horsepower engine do you have with this particular truck?
I really couldn't tell you. As far as I know, it's stock. Like I said, there's company truck that we're running, and like I said, as far as I know, it's stock right off the dealer. It's a 2017.
Okay, so they'll offer multiple horsepower ratings, and so in order to give a gear ratio recommendation, you'd require from a basic level, one would be the horsepower and the other would be the torque, because those will have an effect in what kind of ratio you would recommend. So that would be a tough one to do. I'm assuming that you said you had a 375.
I believe so. Like I said, when we're doing 65 on the highway, the TAC is up at 1500.
Okay. And what kind of transmission do you have in that?
It's an Allison automatic.
Oh, okay. That's a
That
different
makes it
animal.
difficult.
Oh boy! Now we've thrown a wrench into the works here.
That's a whole different animal.
Doesn't that thing have a
Yes.
final ratio of like 0.64? I think it does.
Some of them do.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah,
wait,
the Allison's definitely.
Jay, do you know if you have that? Doesn't Allison make one now that's like a 10 speed? Didn't they?
They did, but they quit.
They
quit
did.
building it.
Okay, so this one is going to be a 6, right? Is this a 6 speed?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that final ratio on most of these is 0.64. It's pretty tall.
Yeah,
But
and
see,
you're probably about 1650 torque on that thing too.
Yeah, we're missing. In an algebra problem, you can only be missing one thing. We're missing like 4 here, right? I mean, we just are guessing at everything here, and that's just not going to work. I mean, we got to get down to details. Which engine? What is the true final ratio on this transmission? Because it might not be that one. I don't know. I think we all might as well just throw something at a dartboard on this one.
Yeah. Can we just assume that everything's stock?
Well, no. What we're trying to
there is no stock.
Right there. Well, there is stock, but there's multiple versions. You could have different
options,
horsepowers,
yeah.
different torque curves. That transmission, different models of it could have different final ratios. The only one I'm used to working with is the one they put in all the coaches, because that's what I'm familiar with. It's so rare to have one of these transmissions in a Class 8 truck that we almost never see them. But I can't tell you that is the final ratio, because I don't know how many models of that they make.
Yeah. Some of the challenges.
One thing's for sure.
With an
can we assume can we just work off of that? That's the final ratio, the 6.4.
Well, we could work off all these assumptions, and then we could be completely wrong. And one of the things I don't want to do here is put out wrong information. So there are times where we could speculate a little, but we'd be speculating on so many things here, we could be completely wrong.
Is your goal fuel economy? Let me ask you that. Is that what you're after?
It definitely wouldn't hurt.
Well,
definitely wouldn't hurt.
Well, then let me ask you this.
Well,
we're pulling 80,000 pounds, and up here in New York, we like I said, we got steep hills.
Well, let me ask you this,
Jay,
because Dwayne, I'm glad you asked that question.
The Allison is
Jay,
Yeah, so the
if you
Allison's
say,
either got a 5 or a 6-speed.
yeah, let's go back a second. Jay, when you say fuel mileage would be a nice bonus, tell us why you want to do this then. Other than fuel mileage, if that's just a bonus, what is the reason you're even asking us this?
But I want to know what this truck should have been spec'd at.
To do what?
And
to wait. When you say what,
to do the work that it's working.
Well, but it's doing it.
It may
you
not
do the
be
work
that far off because it doesn't sound like you spend much time on the highway.
Well,
I'll never forget the truck that I worked on that way with somebody, and it turned out their average speed was 7 miles per hour.
Jay, one of the things I try to help
70,
people with,
7.
If we want to get better results, we have to ask better questions. When you ask a question, how should it be spec'd? Let me tell you this: how many trucks?
Ideal spec, I guess.
Ideal for what? That's what we've got to get to. Some guys like to be able to go 85 miles an hour. That's one goal, and we would have to spec very different. Somebody else wants maximum fuel mileage. We got to spec that different. Somebody else wants all kinds of pulling power so they don't have to, go slow up hills. So all of these trucks with all these wild specs, most trucks on the road are not efficient. It's horrible how bad it is. That's why we do this show. But they all get the job done, right? So when you say, well, I just wanted to know if it's spec'd right for this job, to get the job done. Well, it gets the job done every day. Gets it done, job's done. What are you trying to improve by having better specs? That's what we're trying to get to. And when we said fuel mileage, you said that would be a nice bonus. Well, what's the goal?
All right, so let's go for fuel mileage, 80,000 pounds, 70 miles an hour.
Now we have a target.
Like I said,
so we've got one thing. We now have a target. We're still missing all the information we need to calculate how to get to that target.
Is there a reason you chose the Allison transmission by chance?
No. The owner, like I said, up here, like I said, they're not into specking trucks yet, especially, the guys running, construction, pavers and stuff like that. So they just, the truck's on sale, the truck's on the lot, and I buy it. They don't necessarily look at the gear ratios and then when they wonder why they're only paying getting 4 miles to the gallon.
Well, now we have to talk about something else too. How much time percentage wise, how much time do you actually spend at highway speed compared to how much time you spend not at highway speed? Like what percentage of the time are you over even 50 miles an hour? And what percentage of the time are you under 50 miles an hour?
70% of the time on the road, 30%, like I said, loading, unloading.
Yeah, so I probably wouldn't spec an Allison transmission for that application, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
The disadvantage you have with an Allison, it has its advantages and it has its disadvantages. An Allison transmission has a torque converter in it, and that torque converter is a fluid coupler. So it's really there is a mechanical lockup there in some aspects of it, but it loses energy through torque conversion. It just uses hydraulics there. So it loses a lot of energy. So therefore it also loses fuel efficiency. It's either a 5 or a 6-speed transmission, and the splits are larger in that because, it has to be because it's only 5 or 6 gears. So therefore it's never really in the sweet spot of the engine. So your transmission selection is probably your biggest challenge there. Now there's an advantage to the Allison. One is obviously you don't have a clutch there, and it's just gas and go. They do have some good startability. My recommendation from a powertrain perspective is obviously to drive you back into the Volvo family with an automated transmission. Some of these transmissions have very low low transmission ratios. So, you're 32.5 to 1, which gives you a very deep startability when you're off road. And then, if you're on the highway, you go with a lower numeric ratio. Now, there are some limits there based on the manufacturers of axles. because the surface that you're on. So based on your surface that you're on, you should be in that 308 range. But again, you'd have to do a transmission swap. For your application with an Allison transmission, it's spec'd about where it should be, because you're only going to put out about 1,650 foot-pounds of torque, what that transmission will take in. So it's very low torque. So therefore, you have to have very high numeric ratios, which result in poor efficiency. But to Kevin's point, it does the job, and it does the job it's designed to do. It's just not designed to do it very efficiently.
Right. And then we'd have to, again, figure out if it's fuel mileage. We would look at this operation very differently than we look at over the road. 30% is a lot in idle and slow and shifting and all those other things. That has a bigger effect. During that time, rolling resistance becomes one of the biggest factors, not aerodynamics and some of the other things. But those are pretty challenging. We could do better than 4. I'm positive we could figure out how to get an operation like that to 6+, but we'd have to take our time.
So
go ahead, Joel.
Yeah. So here's exactly how I can just hear my brother talking about this right now going, look, I can't get drivers. Nobody knows how to drive. Nobody knows how to shift. Nobody takes care of equipment. Just build me a damn tank and get the job done.
You're right.
Yep. The transportation is not their main source of income.
Yep.
They just want a truck that anybody can drive, beat the living hell out of it, and get the job done.
That's a good point.
That's essentially what they got. Low torque. It's the Allison automatic. You can put anybody in it. I don't care what the fuel costs. Just go get the job done.
That's a good point.
And I'll almost guarantee you that's the boss's attitude here.
Yep. We should make this point, though, again, because this point gets lost. In fact, everybody in the industry seems to have the opposite approach. Here's what everybody looks at an operation like this goes, well, yeah, it's 4 miles to the gallon, but we all get 4 miles to the gallon, and there's nothing you can do, so why bother, right? Right? That's what they all say. But the difference when you can go from 4 to 5 is the savings, Joel, it's probably going to be about double than when you go from 9 to 10. I mean, just doing the rough math in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Close.
Yeah, that's what stinks for me and Joel. Other people pick up a 10th and they get all thrilled to death, and we're like, well, we got a 10th.
It does, but you always have to keep in mind vocational applications. They typically don't run as many miles,
right.
So we're probably talking closer to 50,000 than 150,000 miles a year. So it becomes very difficult to cost justify a fuel efficient vocational truck based on help availability. There's just so many moving factors here. And let's face it, this is not their source of income. This is a necessary evil. I just want that truck to run every stinking day and make sure it can make it to the job site. Don't care.
Similar to private carriers.
That is going to be, going to be the attitude of most people in that profession. That would be my guess.
Yep, I agree.
And the Allison can work well. That's why the military has quite a few of them.
Well, like you said, they're really
they'll
heavy
take some
duty.
Abuse for sure.
They'll take some abuse. They are easier to drive. The reason they're popular in the coach world, that all the big coaches, all the diesel pushers have them. Two reasons. One, when they were building these prior to automated manual transmissions, nobody wanted to shift gears in a coach, so they're going to put the automatic in there. It'd be interesting now to look at some of these drive lines on these coaches and see if an I-shift would be a really good option. Doesn't Volvo build
they do that.
Big coaches in Europe?
Yeah, they do that.
That's what and they'll put the I-shift in it. They love the Allison in coaches because you don't even feel the shift. You have no idea that transmission is shifting at all. The engine's 45 feet behind you and the transmission. You can't hear anything. You can't really feel it. And that's what they want. You just press on the accelerator and it goes and it's nice and smooth and everybody's happy with it. But it's also why it's embarrassing for me, the guy that spends, 6 hours a week talking about fuel economy, and the best I can get out of this thing is 5 to 5.5. I mean, it's just awful. And I'm 40,000 pounds. I have almost no aerodynamic. I mean, think about how aerodynamic a coach really is compared to a tractor trailer. It's significantly more. I don't have the gap. I don't have a lot of issues going on. I should have lots of advantages here on fuel mileage, and I struggle to get 5.5. And I have a feeling that transmission is the biggest problem.
What do you think, Joel? I think the driver's probably at least 50% of it, don't you, Joel?
Well,
Now,
no, wait a minute. I distinctly remember Kevin taking a transmission that was designed for 1,650 pound-feet of torque and putting about 3,000 pound-feet of torque to that transmission. I remember this. I remember Kevin talking about blowing his charge air cooler up, blowing the hydraulic.
Dwayne, I have a,
that might have something to do with it.
I have a theory here that you might appreciate, Dwayne. You know this. You can't know what the limit is until you break it, right?
That's right.
Yeah, that has been proven many times.
Right. So
there's no testosterone involved here.
No, of course not. So this is a 45-foot luxury coach. I use it to travel around so I can do my show. Sometimes I'll be out on the road 2 or 3 months, and I can do my show and live, and I'm comfortable. I was hanging out at Pittsburgh Power, and we were doing some work on it. And I said, hey, I went to the engineering guys, and I said, hey, I want you guys to tune my coach. And of course they said, all right, you want us to help you with fuel mileage? And I said, no. I said, I want to have fun this time. I said, I'm serious. I said, I want you to give me as much horsepower as you can possibly give me with the tune. I said, just whatever you can squeeze out of this, squeeze out of it. It was producing, now this is a twin turbo ACERT, but it was produced, it's a C13, 60 pounds of boost.
Oh,
okay. It was pretty healthy. We didn't have time to get it on the dyno when I was there, but my first trip out, the first hill I pulled, I heard a big bang and my boost gauge dropped to nothing, and I blew out the entire side of the charge air cooler.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. So the next 2 months was me driving. And now here's the other thing. I just said, you can't hear the engine. Here's the other thing we did that was kind of crazy. We took the muffler off completely. It was that catalytic converter thing all clogged up. We took it off completely, and we were going to throw just a high flow muffler on it. And I said, well, when we had it off, we're sitting there in the shop, and I said, I wonder what this thing sounds like without a muffler. And you've only got about 4 feet of exhaust pipe after the turbo on this thing.
Oh,
and I started it up, and I'm like, that's not as obnoxious as I thought it would be. I said, I'm going to take this thing out for a drive. So I took it out driving, going down the road. There's almost no change in the noise level. I can't hear that back there. It's not bothering me at all. And when I would use my Jake brake, I would get this really cool rumble. I'm like, oh, I'm just going to leave it like this. I still don't have a muffler on it. I actually like it. But I did turn it back down. Now I peak at about 50 pounds of boost, and it's easier to drive. But I had to drive this thing like staring at the boost gauge all day because I couldn't hear anything. And I would try to keep it down to 50 pounds of boost, and it was almost impossible.
Kevin, if you could see me, my head is shaking back and forth.
Well, see, Kevin done a testosterone test, and he was a little low, so he figured pull the muffler off, crank the boost up.
I'll be fine. That's right.
Would come back in the range.
Yeah.
Shit. Oh wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
When I took it back to the factory shop, and now I had to end the pipe a little short, and we didn't have time to bend it and take it out through the hole in the body like it was. So when I took it back to my factory shop, I'm like, hey, can you guys finish my exhaust for me? And they're like, what do you mean finish it? We walked back there, and they looked at it like, where'd the muffler go? I'm like, I took it off. It was clogged, and I didn't really need it. And they're like, so you want us? And I'm like, no, don't put another muffler on. I just want you to finish the exhaust pipe out through the body.
Pipe, there you go.
They're like, we've never seen this before.
Oh, Jesus. You gonna get a couple of 8-inch pipes to go up the back?
No, see, that would mess with my aerodynamics. Come on now.
Oh, there you go. There you go. There you go.
All right.
Put it all the way to the center and run them right next to each other up the center.
There you go. Yeah, that'd be cool. All right, let's grab one more call today. This is going to be the last call. I turned the phone lines off a while ago. I got to get out of here in a little bit. I think we all do. Rusty, you get the final word today. What's on your mind?
Well, I've got way more questions than I began with after listening to y'all, but I guess my number one question is, how do I get a hold of y'all? What kind of y'all answer emails, or what kind of social media? I'm looking for somebody to help me spec a truck, or at least answer questions. And I don't know how to get a hold of anybody.
Rusty, let me give you
For example, I have a.
Well, let me give you kind
ahead.
of the options on this. So, you can call this show whenever you want. We'll spend a decent amount of time with people. We can only go so deep on the show. Like the last caller, we're going to have a question. If you don't have the answer right there, then we're kind of stuck. So you can call in as many times as you want. We'll help you here for nothing. And if you want more in depth, you want to take more time. Joel, are you? Do you do that directly with people? Do you have time to? I know sometimes it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. Well, we've been kicking the idea around. I haven't done anything officially with that. I'm definitely not opposed to it, and depending on what we're looking at, I mean, I can answer some questions for sure. I can get you an email and whatnot.
I have an idea for you. You and I can talk about this later. So, Rusty, one of the ways that I spend more time with people than I can on the show is the coaching, the group coaching. And these are the kind of things I work on. So I'm working with somebody right now. Not only did we spec the truck the way he wants it, we're buying a used truck. So we went through his operation. I took time. We figured out exactly what we were looking for. I'll also help him look for the truck if he wants. I'll review oil samples. I'll do whatever it takes to get you to the goal. And then when you're done in the coaching program, if we've solved your problem, you just quit. It's a month-to-month program. And we do a coaching call every week. So you get 4 calls a month. Joel, I may talk to you about some kind of a deal where when it's Volvo specific, and maybe we have a deal where I just work you into it and we pay you that way.
Sure.
So those are some of the options. I can tell you this. I would never attempt to do anything like this on email. It would make me insane. I need to be able to talk to somebody. God. Yeah. So emails or social media, I don't do any of this kind of stuff on email or social media. It's just way too inefficient.
Yeah.
I would pay an hourly shop rate just for some information,
Well, here's the thing. My coaching call is $75 a month, and you get 4 2-hour coaching calls.
Well, it's slightly cheaper than my mechanic. So.
Yeah.
I get a lot of people contact me on social media and start trying to do that, and I just give them my number, and I'm like, call.
Well, if I can give out my email and one of you call me, I would, make sure that you got reimbursed for your time. But I guess since I've got you today, Henry, a 264, my operation, I pull a 53-foot rib-sided walk-in floor trailer. I'm always at 84,000, loaded probably 70% of the time. It's 90% highway, but the 10% off-road is what gets me paid. Speed. The 264 ratio and a 2023 D15 work for me.
264 would work. Rib side's hurting you a little bit on the aerodynamics, much like Wayne was talking earlier. What kind of speeds do you run?
Up to 70, but I really like 65.
Yeah, you're getting at the edge of where a 264 would be really happy with a 0.78 overdrive. I would almost move you back to a 216 direct. You're going to say
216 direct?
Yep.
216 direct. Okay.
Only because of your rib-sided trailer, they pull a little bit like a parachute.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It takes on the level.
And where we're talking is not that much different. If it's a 264, you're 205 overall. So 205, 216, you're not that far apart. If you weren't with the rib-sided trailer, I probably would have left you in the 264.
Okay.
I think
don't
one of
think
the
I'll
other
ever find a 216.
one of the other advantages you may have with that direct is you should have a lower starting gear with that, don't you, Henry?
No, they're about the same.
Are they? Okay.
As far as driver feel, yeah, you can't tell that big a difference because they got a deeper first than the 264. I mean the 216, but it all works out. You can't tell the difference to drive it.
Okay.
You should have a little bit better startability in first gear with that, I would imagine, with a direct drive.
Yep. Yeah.
I've never seen a used one.
Not to the point of making. If I'm looking at two used trucks, it's not going to be a deciding factor. The 264 would work, but if I was ordering it, I might lean towards the 216 just simply because of the fact you got the rib trailer.
Okay. All right. Very good.
Is that an open top trailer as well?
Y'all still got me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that an open top trailer as well?
It's open top, but it's tarped. I mean, it's got a tarp on it all the time.
Okay. All right. But
even with a tarp,
there for sure.
Yep. That's the only reason I'm backing them off to the 216. And I have some people that stay in the Northeast, right, where their speeds are down lower. And I get a lot of arguments even from the factory with me, but it works out every time. I've kept them in 241 directs just because of where their true average speed is. That they're not spending much time up where they would take advantage of a 216 or a 264 overdrive.
Yep.
But the
Joel,
truck doesn't get out of Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
Joel, what is the verdict on? Can you get a PTO on a turbo compound?
I believe you can.
Can you run a PTO on a turbo compound? Okay.
Yeah, I don't
see
why
you couldn't. Can you get a turbo compound in a Mac?
Yes. Yeah, you can get
a
rear engine mounted. You can get a rear engine mounted PTO that'll run all the time. So if you're running down the road, you can do it, or you can put it on the back of the transmission. There's like 10 different PTO options on the transmission. So you can set almost anything up for it in both Mac and Volvo on the turbo compounding.
There you go.
Okay. All right. I know y'all are not Cummins guys. I'm finding some good values, like cheap trucks with low miles with these efficiency Cummins engines. I don't have to go super fast all the time. I'm used to being a little underpowered. What the Leroy or Brian at Pittsburgh Power said you can't go over 450 horse on those Cummins efficiencies. The dealer says that he can get them turned up at the Cummins shop to 500. Do y'all have any?
Well, I think what they're probably saying
but you wouldn't want to, and I can tell you from running the 400 Detroit that was that way.
Yeah,
I would leave it alone.
The efficiency was designed to be efficient throughout the whole system. You go in and start changing the programming, it's not the efficiency anymore.
No, I agree. I agree completely. But what I would like to know is, I wouldn't be shocked if that 410 horsepower made as much horsepower and torque at 1,300 RPMs as my 600 horsepower N14 does.
You're right.
Possible, right?
It's probably the way it is.
Right.
And
I know that 41750 Detroit I was running. I really liked it, but most drivers that drove it, as soon as they heard it was a 400 horse, it was a slug. Well, it wasn't a slug, but because they heard 400, I was always like with the people that bought them and had drivers complain. I'm like, just to change the sticker on the side of the door that they think they got a 500, they'll be all right.
That's clear. I see it. Well, I've got a lot more questions, but y'all probably ready to get out of here. So.
All right. We will talk to you again soon, or you can reach out to us. Like I said, we could do this in the coaching program. We could finally find a couple ways to do this. I'm going to end the week on a topic I've had on my list here for a while now, but it keeps getting put off. And I've gotten multiple invitations to other podcasts lately. And you know what they all want to talk about? Everybody wants to invite me on to talk about broker transparency. Can we just move past this? Nothing's going to change. But everybody wants to talk about it because, the FMCSA took it up again, and they're going to come out with all their recommendations, or they won't, or they'll kick it down the road again. But one of the interesting things that is in the FMCSA's latest kind of ruling or their comments were that one of the issues is the idea that brokers are writing waivers to get around the 371.3, the requirement to show the documents after the transaction to all parties. The way around that is the brokers just write a waiver in their contract, and it's common. And everybody was screaming, "You can't do that! You can't do that!" Well, turns out they can. And the Supreme Court has ruled on it. It's completely legal. If both parties agree to that contract, you can waive that right. So that would have to be changed by Congress. I don't see it being changed. Here's the other thing I'm going to tell everybody, and I've said this many times. Let them write all the new rules they want. If it's important enough, people will find ways around them. They always do. Like they found a way around the requirement. Okay, we'll just make them sign a waiver. If they eliminate the waiver, they'll find some. Here's one of the things that will happen. I'd be all for this. We're already working on this in the background anyway. You'll see private networks created. These carriers, these brokers all work within a private load board style network, and they just ignore all of this. And if nobody's reporting any problems, then nobody's going to come and enforce any of this stuff. So that's going to happen. Then the people that don't get involved with that are going to be in a worse position than they were before. There'll be a bunch of freight that they won't even have access to anymore. That's one of the ways.
Kevin,
go ahead.
Very similar.
Broker transparency is your new sweet spot, Kevin.
Oh man, you ain't kidding. I'm so sick of it.
No. So your private network's very similar to what I'm doing with Schneider, working their own load board. So
Right.
there's
Similar.
not other brokers or anything out there working their own load. And for what I'm doing and the way I'm using it, it's fine.
And you don't require transparency. You don't care what Schneider got paid for that load. You look at the rate they're offering you.
Fire up the load board, and yeah, that's exactly right. Does it work for me? And if it works for me, I take the load. If it doesn't work for me, I either ask them for more money.
Right.
About half the time, they'll say okay, and if they don't, I'll say let's find something else. They go, okay, we'll help you look for something. They flat out ask you, what do you need, and we'll help you find it.
We will end up with a bunch of closed private networks of brokers and carriers who work together, which is what we've been recommending anyway. Find a couple of good sources of freight, stick with them, provide value to them, and all this stuff goes away. Freight fraud is diminished by about 90% when you do this. So the kind of the point is they'll find a way around it. Here's an analogy. I've been talking a lot about how stupid it is that in Oregon, I can buy cannabis on every corner. I can grow my own. For a while last year, no drugs in Oregon were illegal. They weren't legalized, but they were all decriminalized. If you got caught with fentanyl, there was no charge. And it was such a bad idea, and they did it so poorly that they've reversed it already after a year. But I said, how crazy is it? I can buy cannabis. I can be smoking fentanyl on the street and there won't be a charge, but I can't buy raw milk. How ignorant is that? I mean, how the rules. So I just found a company and I can buy all kinds of raw, not only raw dairy, but A2 dairy. People listening probably know why that's important. I can buy all the raw 2 dairy I want. I can buy milk, cream, yogurt, butter, half and half, cottage cheese, you name it. Every dairy product, raw cheese, I can buy all raw. You know how? On the label, it clearly states on the front of the label, for pets only. It's illegal. It's legal to sell it, even on the internet. They'll ship it to me. I can buy it all day long. All of these products I can buy because the label says for pets only. Go to their website, look at every product, and that line by line, all human grade ingredients, all human grade sanitation. They make it clear to everybody, this stuff is safe for human consumption. This isn't made like dog food. It's made like human food. They meet all the requirements, except even after meeting all those requirements, it's illegal to sell unless they put the words on the label for pets only.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's what happens. When there's enough demand for a product, you write all the regulations you want, people will find ways around it.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Anybody else? Dwayne, I also want to say before we wrap this up, thank you so much for your time this week. That's twice now you've spent plenty of time with us and explained things, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. I have a spreadsheet I'm going to send you over here for calculating fuel benefits. I'll send that over to you. It might be helpful for you.
Oh, I'd love that. Thank you. Anybody have any final words of wisdom?
Well, I wanted to say too. I mean, even though I'm from a different camp, it was great meeting you and getting to chat with you today, Dwayne.
Likewise, truly a pleasure. I've heard a lot about you, Henry.
Joel, anything?
Yeah, I mean, just on the subject matter at hand, where we're talking about gearing and everything. Just kind of keep in mind there's a lot of moving parts here, and you have to look at the whole picture, and you have to have all that information in order to get it right. And I think that's the important thing. Just throwing out rear axle ratios willy nilly and saying, "Oh, it'll go up the hill faster because it's a 411 and you got a 370." It doesn't necessarily work that way. So it's pretty complex. I get the opportunity to talk to a lot of people at corporate on the engineering side, and it's shocking how difficult it is to get your mind around this, even for guys that are in this all the time. I kind of look at things outside the box from time to time, and I'll throw it Dwayne's way. You just have the silence on the other end of the phone. He's like, "Oh, let me call you back."
You're right.
We'll get a phone call back, but it's I love it because I get to push these guys and maybe make them think a little bit outside the box from time to time, and I think that's important on product development and how we bring things to market.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for today. That'll do it for the week. And again, thanks all of you guys. I appreciate it. It makes for a great show. I think this has been a good week. It's always a good week when I learn something new, and it's a really good week when I learn something new that I just couldn't get my head around. And now I get it. So,
Kevin?
Yes.
Over the holidays, take a break from the vaccines, read Rickenbacker. It'll refresh your mind some.
That's a good idea. This vaccine stuff, I got to stop. This is just making me absolutely insane.
Just say it.
Yeah,
just saying,
that's
Kevin.
a good idea. I think I should do
that.
that.
With that, I hope you all have Merry Christmas.
Yeah, good point. Merry Christmas, everybody. We will see you next 2 weeks are really goofy schedules. I can't even remember what they are, but I do know that I set up our show schedule so I could take more time off. So I think I'm only doing a couple shows a week for the next 2 weeks. So we'll see you then.
Are we doing next Friday?
I don't think so. Let me look at the calendar and see if I can try to figure out how I did this. I probably have a show calendar somewhere, but I don't know where it is. Angie says no show on Friday.
One other thing.
Yeah, Angie, do
real
you
quick, Kev,
know the schedule? If you could type it in real quick. Go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, I don't know what your plans are or outlook for the truck show is. I'll probably be down there again with the Air Dog and the Hot Shot Secret people with hopefully the new ride. Not 100% sure on that, but I'm hoping to be down there the entire time. So if you've got anything that you want me to do or participate in, just let me know.
Absolutely, I do. If you're going to be there, we can talk about that. Henry, you as well. During the CMC, I'm going to really try this year to stick to a schedule. last year I was all over the board.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of my first times trying to do this CMC like this, where I only had a day and a half live, and then I knew I was going to be doing a year, and I was just kind of all over the board. We talked about a lot of big picture stuff on the first 2 days, which I still need to do some of that, but I'm going to be a lot more scheduled this time. I've got people I want to get in. I would love to get both of you over there when I do a fuel mileage segment. That'd be awesome.
Sure.
Well,
just let us know.
Yeah, we can talk about that. All right, everybody, have a great holiday. Merry Christmas. We'll see you. No show 12/24 through January 1st. So should be able to figure it out from that. All right. We'll see you sometime soon. Be safe, be profitable, be fit and healthy. Always do the hard work and master the journey.